violent criminals accountable. And I'll tell you, if this comes to pass, it will be, if you can imagine this, a new low in the pardons that are being doled out by Donald Trump. And I just have to hope, perhaps against hope, that this doesn't happen.
Knowing full well that the prospect of pardoning Diddy is on the table as far as Trump is concerned, why wouldn't the prosecutors who are prosecuting this case just defer to state prosecutors? And why wouldn't state prosecutors pick this up, knowing that all of these efforts to hold this scumbag to account are probably going to be for naught once Donald Trump gets his fingers in this?
Well, listen, federal prosecutors should not defer prosecuting cases that have a proper, what's called federal jurisdictional hook. If you are, for example, involved in sex trafficking of people across state lines, that's a federal crime. And the federal authorities are generally in a far better position, particularly resource-wise, not skill-wise, because the state district attorneys are extremely accomplished, experienced, and adept at prosecuting violent crimes and all crimes. But I like to see the federal government actually flexing its jurisdictional muscle and taking responsibility and handling challenging prosecutions that have that kind of direct federal hook, federal jurisdiction. And certainly they're not going to abandon it at this point because they're mid-trial and Donald Trump is ruminating about pardoning Diddy. However, remember that anytime you commit a federal crime, you almost always also commit a state crime. And even if the federal crime ends up in a guilty verdict, a not guilty verdict, or a pardon after a guilty verdict, the state authorities can still consider bringing charges. It's not double jeopardy if two different sovereigns, two different jurisdictions, the federal government and a state government, bring criminal charges for identical conduct. So listen, even if there is a presidential pardon of Diddy in the event he's convicted, he will be far from out of the woods.
With that said, this, of course, isn't the only pardon that Donald Trump has publicly mused about effectuating. He's also brought up the prospect of pardoning those who were convicted regarding the kidnapping plot against the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. So first and foremost, would the same idea apply? Is this something that the prosecutors in Michigan, state prosecutors, could take up, knowing full well that they may not see their full sentences carried out because Donald Trump all of a sudden has decided that anybody who's convicted of political violence or who has an R next to his or her name is somehow innocent?
Yeah, Brian, these folks who were convicted of this kidnapping plot against Governor Whitmer, I mean, literally, they were outside her residence at one point. This thing was no joke. There was evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that they committed federal crimes, and the jury convicted them of those crimes. If Donald Trump were to deign to pardon them, I have to believe they violated any number of Michigan state laws, and I can't imagine that the state authorities, the state prosecutors, wouldn't go after them and try to hold them accountable after the intense injustice that a presidential pardon would represent. So I also don't think these guys would, be in the clear if Donald Trump pardoned them. But even more fundamentally, a president of the United States who now goes down the road of pardoning anybody who victimized one of his enemies, one of his perceived opponents on the political landscape, you're gonna basically announce it's open season to commit federal crimes against any and all Democrats. I mean, this is kind of like us slouching toward the end of American democracy as we know it. And I also think it's a sign, Brian, of Donald Trump's desperation, and he is becoming weaker, not stronger by the day. He is losing allies. He's attacking people like Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society. He is losing the people who have been there supporting him. And I think that could end up ending very badly for Donald Trump.
Well, just rounding out this trio of prospective pardons, can you speak about Paul Walsack and what that would represent if he goes through with it?
Yeah, this is a sort of lesser noticed pardon, but it really brings into full focus Donald Trump's lies. And in fact, this one pardon proves Donald Trump to be a liar several times over. So people need to pay attention to these kind of nefarious pardons. Let me unpack it a little bit. This guy, Paul Walsack, was a healthcare owner and provider where? South Florida, of course. And what he was doing was he was collecting Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid money from the earnings of his employees, nurses, healthcare workers. And you know what you're supposed to do with that kind of money that you collect from your employees? You're supposed to give it to the federal government, but Paul Walczak didn't. What he did is he put it in his own dang bank account, either literally or figuratively, and treated himself to private jets. He bought a $2 million yacht. He went on expensive shopping excursions, all over the place, to the tune of about $10 million. And investigators went about digging into these crimes, and they poured, I'm sure, tens of thousands of investigator hours into these crimes. They built a very strong case against Paul Walczak for fraud, for tax evasion, and other crimes, so strong that Paul Walczak pleaded guilty. He admitted under oath in federal court at the time of his plea, because people may not know, when you go in and plead guilty, you're placed under oath by the judge, and you have to swear under the penalties of perjury that you're guilty and that you actually committed these crimes, not that you were being railroaded or not that DOJ had been weaponized and is forcing you to plead guilty. He pleaded guilty. And then the judge sentenced him to prison and to pay restitution to the federal government in the amount of $4.4 million. And he was supposed to report to the Federal Bureau of Prisons in the coming days to begin serving his prison sentence. But Paul Walczak's mommy went to a fundraiser at Donald Trump's golf club, gave Donald Trump $1 million, and lo and behold, Paul Walczak is pardoned thereafter. No corruption here, folks. But here is what that proves. Oh, and by the way, the pardon not only did away with his jail term, he didn't have to report to spend even one day behind bars, but the pardon killed the judge's order to pay that $4.4 million in restitution to the government, to the federal government, for the Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid money he stole. So when you see Donald Trump, who is forever saying, I protect Social Security, it's the exact damn opposite. You just took $1 million from Paul's mommy, you pardoned Paul, and you said, by the way, you don't have to pay that $4.4 million in Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare money that you stole, that you wrongfully kept from the federal government. Is that protecting Social Security? Let me ask another question. Is that backing the blue when you have tens of thousands of law enforcement man and woman hours, officers, detectives, agents, and investigators building a case? And it takes years to build the kind of case that is so strong that an offender like Paul Walczak will go into court and swear under oath he's guilty. And you have Donald Trump, with a sign of a pardon, just shitting all over that police work. He backs the blue? No, he demeans the blue. He destroys all of the hard, honest, ethical work the blue, the investigators, law enforcement agents, do to try to hold these kind of folk accountable. Don't believe a damn word out of Donald Trump's mouth about protecting Social Security or backing the blue.
Well, it's not only that. It's also the fact that their whole budget bill seeking to strip Medicaid away from 13.7 million Americans and food assistance away to the tune of $300 billion, that's all predicated on this idea that there is this massive amount of fraud that's being perpetuated, and that's supposedly the thing that we're rooting out. So all of their cuts are predicated on this idea that there's fraud, and yet at the same time, you are literally giving a get-out-of-jail-free card to the one guy who openly pleaded guilty to committing fraud as it relates to earned benefits and Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Like, this is exactly the thing that Republicans are pretending that this whole budget bill is going to take care of. That's their whole excuse that they're looking to use to be able to cut all of this funding as an offset to give themselves, billions of dollars in tax cuts. And then we have somebody who is an admitted criminal to that exact tune. This is exactly what he did. And yet that's the guy who gets a get-out-of-jail-free card? What message does that send?
That crime pays. When you pardon crime like this, you don't just excuse it, you encourage it.
Right.
You encourage people to go ahead and engage in this very kind of fraud because, if you get jammed up, you're going to have a presidential pardon to get you out of it.
Yeah, perfectly put. Well, look, there is certainly more on this front as it relates to pardons, as it relates to Donald Trump cozying up to any criminal, any con man who's going to